Folks, what's going on? Global 5, we're going to be doing a BCS kind of roundup video today. Sorry the channel's been kind of dead. We got BCS dates sprung on us at the beginning of August, and me and one of the locals decided that we were going to travel a long time ago if we were going to get these, and we then had to whirlwind plan tickets and figure out what deck I'm going to play and all that other stuff because they were so close together to the announcement and everything else. The first one that we decided to go to was Houston, where my deck of choice for this season, quintuplets, was not legal. And then we also were going to travel to Georgia, which was the week after, where quintuplets was legal. So the first challenge I had was figuring out what type of deck I wanted to play in Houston. So that presented a unique challenge for me because I like to grind my decks. I like to play a million games before I enter a tournament. So the deck that I ended up electing to pick was Bang Dream, Choice Gate. And I looked at the price for Springfest trios, and this deck was about $200 at the time. I do have a lot of the older cards, so that saves me a little bit on the pricing, but the new set cards, when I looked for BCS, were only about $120, and I ended up with foil Yukina Rickies in that price. So I just scooped up the deck, and the reason why I picked this was Hololive and Mushoku I expected to be very high contenders in the meta still for Houston. And the Chew Too Early play, which is not pictured here, is hexproof, which allows me a sort of play pattern where the tap counter has less value to my opponents. So with the what I expected to be the top two decks in the room having tap counter, this was the reason why I picked this deck. So my deck comes in approximately 2 weeks before the tournament, which I think gave me like a week of play before we had to lock in the list. So I played 30-50 games in that week, and the deck seemed really good. I was killing people with a fairly high percentage kill range from like 2-5. Just because of how the finisher works. So I felt fairly good going into the tournament with this type of deck. So I submit my deck list, and as I submit the deck list and start to play like the next 50 round games, I start to notice issues with the deck that I would have changed had I had time and testing and all that other stuff. So I was like, all right, well, we'll go into the tournament and we'll hope that, the first, scenarios kind of happen and not the second one. So, yeah, test play a bunch of games before you go to a tournament. Just highly recommended, just get the reps in. Now, that wasn't the only kind of uphill thing going into these tournaments that happened. I also, the Wednesday before we flew out for Houston, shattered my thumb. So, going into these tournaments, I was, for Houston, in a splint, in a lot of pain. And then in Georgia, after I had surgery on the thumb, I ended up in a cast, also in a decent amount of pain. So, going into the tournaments, my expectations were very tempered on how I was going to do. So I didn't even know if I was going to make one of these videos because I was just expecting to bomb out. But, yeah, we'll just go into how each tournament went. I did fairly good. As I said, I was going to just not make a video because I was expecting to bomb. But we did fairly okay. So here we are with a video. And, yeah, we're going to go right into Houston here. So Houston round 1, I played a rather new player who was on a memory Hololive sort of build. Had the Polka early play, had a bunch of memory. My opponent kind of couldn't set up the memory stuff early. I think he only ended up with like 2 memory by the time I hit him to like mid level 1. Now I'm 0-6, he's level 1. I've got like 6 climaxes in my deck, still first deck. My opponent slams a choice with only 1 Current on board, and he hits me from 0-6 to 2-1. Yeah, just completely skips my level 1 game. So I'm like, oh, it's good. It's gonna be one of these games. So I fix my deck state. I hit him from the 1-5 or so he's at up to like upper twos without giving me any sort of like setup play for the Marine. Then he goes to 3-0, gets down 2 Marine, hits me, I think, to like 3-0 from 2-1, and then I just Mashiro combo and kill him. So it's kind of unfortunate for him that he ate in that mid game after I ate. So I guess it's a little bit of give and take there, but I was definitely worried when I went up that high going into a Marine deck because Marine could just kill you, man. As we'll see in some other later rounds here, but yeah, there was a lot of good player, good fun. Wish him well as he's overseas now. He's telling me so. And then yeah, so 1-0. I'm like, wow, won a game with being in pain with a broken thumb, and we go into round 2. And I run into, at this point, what the quintuplets deck was, because since set 2 was not a valid deck. The cigarettes, quote unquote, combo with the Yotsuba level 1 into the Ichika finisher level 3. This is a matchup I'm fairly well aware. I've been playing Quince since it came out in Japanese. So, with the Ichika finisher, although not my personal favorite, I know if you hit 3-0, you can sometimes just die. So I'm trying to like mitigate how I'm clocking, hoping I don't take damage. And my opponent hits me to 3-0, like just straight up 3-0. And I'm like, and he's 2-4, 2-5 at this point. So I'm like, all right, I just have to go for a Mashiro kill turn, which I know I can do from that range. And as I go into my finishing turn, he doesn't cancel the Mashiros. I think I had triple Mashiro on board. That just doesn't cancel. So he goes from 2-4, 2-5 to 3-6. So then it's like, oh, okay. So then he goes into his finishing turn. Now, he had just refreshed, so his deck was fairly good. He wasn't going to die on attack or anything like that. He double Ichika plays, and then puts a 1 soul attacker in the other lane, because he wouldn't be able to pay the combo if he played a 3rd Ichika. So, or any other 2 soul beater, because of the timing where you play climax and I have to pay cost. So he swings in with the first Ichika, soul triggers for 4, and I'm just like, oh, that's not good. I cancel the 4 on 1. So then we have the double burn 2. I cancel the first burn 2 on 1, the next burn 2 on 1. And I'm like, oh, I think this is like one of the only scenarios where I could potentially just not die to what's happening. So then he swings in with the other Ichika. I cancel that on 1 too. I eat the 2. So now I'm at 3-4. My opponent's 3-6. And he swings in with his 2 soul attacker. And I'm like, just don't soul trigger. Just don't soul trigger. Doesn't soul trigger. Puts me to 3-6. And I'm like, oh, so good. I then look at my deck, and I have 2 cards in my deck. And I'm like, oh. Draw for turn, 1 card in my deck. And I'm just like, how do I play out of this scenario? Because the Chew-2 heals at Encore step, I had no on-play healer in my hand because I had Bushiroad the turn previously. So I'm like, how do I get out of this scenario where I just don't just die? Do I play the Chew-2 and just pass? So I'm like thinking. I look at my hand. Now I'm one-handed, so like my hand it is like super hard to just like keep track of what everything's in it. I look at my hand, and the one of Mashiro Icy Tail that gives damage scry is in my hand. And I'm like, when did I get this? Why is this in my hand? This is supposed to be on the board to like swap into for the damage scry. And I'm just like, okay, well, my only out is to slam this card, swing in, Icy Tail for 3, and hope it sticks. My opponent has 12 cards in deck, 3 climaxes. I'm like, oh, well, here we go. So I put it on board. I swing. I pay the 1, discard 1. Mills the bottom 3. The third card from the top of his deck is a climax. And we're like, oh, let's go. At this point, we're in time, and like judges are standing around us, everything, and it's just all like super hype. He takes the 1 and dies, and I was just all like, what a game. So I was like, wow. That's probably one of the best Weiss games. Like, just everything that happened in the game that I didn't go over, and then that sort of finish was just bananas. That was a crazy game. And probably a game I'll remember for a very long time. Good opponents and good crazy endings. That's what we like to see in these card games. So now I'm 2-0, and I'm like, whoa, this is a lot better than I was expecting to be doing, injured and everything else. So we go into round 3, where we've got another Hololive matchup. This one was playing the Sheep, quote-unquote, cigarettes combo. I'd need to figure out a better name to use for myself because I hate using that name. Into Maureen. This game was a super good game as well. Me and him went back and forth. I hit him to 3-0 from 2-4 when I really was hoping to not really do it. He was very compressed, so he was likely going to either take like the 1s or he was going to cancel on my bigger swings. So I hit him for 1. He took that to go to 2-5, and I'm like, all right, we just need to stay here, and he has to, would have to push himself to 3 or just not get there. But then he eats one of my 2s, like I said, very compressed, and I'm like, okay. And then cancels my other 2. I'm like, all right, well, he's going to go into Maureen because I'd watch him sculpt his pieces. And then, so he triple Maureen's me. I've got 4 or 5 climaxes, I forget at this point, in like 20 cards in deck. So triple Maureen is like pretty scary. Like, if I eat the 2s, I don't die, just because I'm like 2-5, I believe, is what I said. So I'm gonna go with one of my initials. So I'm 2-5. So like, I don't just straight up die in this scenario, but it can be really dicey. So he goes into the attacks. I eat the 2 on the first one, go to 3-0. Then I eat the 3. Then he goes into the next one. I eat the 2, and then I eat that 3, and I just die. So, just straight up cancel. No cancels in 9 cards. Very, very unlucky. So, what are you gonna do? It's a good game though. I'm like, I can't complain. We both did our thing. It was super fun. So, hey, whatever. So then I move into the 4th round and face first Don Machi. Now, in testing Don Machi, Bang Dream, I had a very, fairly good game into it. Like, as long as the Don Machi players doesn't loop the door, like, it was almost fairly often that I was winning the game, probably like 75%. In games where the door was being looped, I probably won 50-50, let's say, just depending on how they canceled with the ability to torch. But I go into this, and I'm playing against the reigning world champion, Riaz, and I'm just like, oh, nice. So, it's pretty cool to play against players of that high profile that I've never played against. So, I'm going into it, and I open my first hand, and I have 3 choices in it. And I'm like, oh. So this is the game where that second half of testing, it's going to implode. Awesome. Against Riaz. Literally the worst option. So I'm like mulligan one and like a bunch of threes in my hand. I'm holding two choices and I just can't get zeros. So from the onset of this game, the deck just sort of imploded and just would not keep CXs. I'm like triggering them, I'm drawing them. It's just really bad. So I heal down at 2 the best I can and just sort of like, okay, we just need to stall out here. Just because of the kill range of Mashiro. So he hits me to 3-0. He's like 2-0. I'm like literally a whole level behind this whole game. And I hit him up to 2-5. And then I get a double cancel and E2 on the next turn. But at the same turn, he'd healed down to 2-3. I can kill with Mashiro at 2-3, but I have to sequence my attacks very well in order to do this. And so I'm looking at my board, and I have a direct with a Mashiro, I have a front with a Mashiro, and I have a front with a two-soul beater. And I'm doing the math in my head, and I'm like, as long as the two-soul beater sticks, I have a chance to win this game because I can chain all 4 Mashiros. And theoretically, if I trigger, I can deal enough damage. So I ask him how much he's out. He's out 6. I know there's one in his stock. And he's got 1 card in deck. And I'm like, do we take the gamble that that card is clean and we hit for the 2 here because it's very likely to stick if that is not a climax? So I take the gamble. It's a climax. So the 2 cancels, takes refresh. And I'm like, okay, I think that costs me this game. So I go through my Mashiros. He cancels. He eats. So actually, the direct lane, he eats that 4 or 5. And then he cancels the other Mashiros. I go with another one, and then he eats that too. Essentially, however the damage works out, because I don't remember exactly, I hit him to 3-5. The 2 damage wins the game. So then I just die on the swing back to Hestia because I'm at 3-2. And Hestia, I think is fairly good to kill at that sort of damage range. So even though the deck imploded, I was like, at least we made it look like a close game when you're, a whole level behind the whole time. So at this point, I'm 2-2, and I'm kind of like, do I keep playing? Because where I've lost, the rounds are probably like really bad. So whatever, I'll go on and I'll play into the 5th round here. So we run into this really weird and unique Data Live / Fujimi Bunko deck. It's 6 standby, I believe, 2 gates with this top end. So I shuffle. At this point, I was in the splint, and I could still shuffle. As you'll find out in Georgia, I did not shuffle my deck myself once. So I shuffle my deck up going into this round, and I open 4 choices in my opening hand. Okay. This is going to be cool. So I mulligan out. I think I mulligan 2 of them. I think I have a runner in my hand, so I'm going first. So I'm like, okay, I'll just mulligan 2 of these, and we'll try to ditch one of them at some point, and then keep one for combo. So by the time I mulligan, I now have 2 choices and a gate in my hand. 2 choices in my graveyard. We're out 5. I trigger a gate on my runner attack. I cancel once on his tri-field, and then I draw the last climax on turn 2. And I'm just like, oh, when we implode over here. So, uh, at that point, I just kind of was like, I'm 2-2. We're just gonna play the game. Honestly, don't even really remember what happens, except I get to the top end where once again I'm just like out all my climaxes, and somehow we played like 4 more turns after that. I just don't know how I didn't die. Uh, if I had been able to get a Mashiro Gate in the top end, I think I win the game. But that, was literally just like the lowest kind of roll I think I've ever experienced. So I end up 2-3, which I think is probably my worst finish I've ever had at any regional. Whether that's a combination of life uh, things that happen with the hand, or the deck not having the reps, or the list that I wanted, or any of that, I don't know. But that was like just super depressing on how all that ended out. So with surgery looming, I was like, oh, I wonder how Georgia's going to go. But going into Georgia, I was playing 12 standby quintuplets, which is a deck I've gotten a million reps with. So I was like, at least I'm going in with a deck that I want to play. I've got a million reps, and we'll see what happens. So we go into Georgia, where round 1, I fall into quintuplets. The guy mulligans, I'm expecting the mirror, and I'm just like, as expected, whole bunch of mirrors here in Georgia. Come to find out, he's playing the Ichiki level 1 into Ichika from this first set, which was super interesting. Come to find out, I guess he hasn't really updated his deck for the new set, from what he was telling me. So his like buddy kind of threw a couple things together, even though the Itsuki is from the new set. Fairly just standard 1 into 2 for me. He was eating a decent amount, which was good. Because once again, the Ichika combo I just know can kill you from 3-0. So I was kind of tempering my clocks a little bit whenever I needed to. I held board fairly easily. Then he hits me to 2. I go to 2-0, I think, from clocking. And he's like mid 2. Going into his turn, I triple cancel at 2-0. And at that point, it was just game over. I think I just straight up killed him. I don't think he finisher comboed me. Yeah, like the triple cancel at 2-0 was just really bad for him. So yeah, we get the first win, and I'm just like, oh, cool. So here we go. Into round 2. I sit down across from a player that I can tell is kind of new, just based on their mulligan and how they're reading cards. They're taking their time. Like, I'm like, okay, it's not too bad. As long as we don't go to time and he Kaguya finishers me, and then I just end up losing to damage. I'm like, as long as that doesn't happen, that like whatever. So I kind of let him play his game, at his pace. At level 1, he is out a decent amount of climaxes. I want to say he's out like 4 or 5. I don't know what's in his hand. So he starts sculpting level 3s, particularly finishers, which I thought was really interesting. So he's doing that. Then he swings into me. I go, I think, to 2-0 or something. And on the crackback, he triple cancels. And he's at 1-4-1-5. And I'm like, oh. Well, if he was sculpting 3s, and if he's got playables, this is really bad for me. Because I might just be in a damage race disparity. Come to find out, he didn't have any playables. Ended up getting a 1-0 Miyuki that can get super big against level 2s on board, and that was his only attacker. Versus my 2-2, I hand encore it. I combo again. And at that point, I hit him from like 1-5 to like 2-6 or something. And it was kind of just game over at that point. Whatever the next turn he had, I canceled. And then I think I just killed him. So we did almost go to time. But just because of how the game played out, it was fine. But gave him some advice. He'd been playing for a couple of weeks. Got a good deck. I actually need to do a deck video on Kaguya. I've actually settled on a Japanese list, and we'll go over that. And I think it's actually going to be really good into English when it comes out. But yeah, that's for a different video. Look forward to that. And we are on to round 3 here in Georgia. I think this gentleman had the buy card, so he's fresh into the tournament with a max rarity Adventure Time deck. This is another deck with a finisher that is very scary if you are at a certain damage level. So I know this going into it, and I'm just like, as long as I don't have a damage disparity, stop clocking when you need to, and hopefully you'll be fine. He canceled early, and then as the game went on, started to take a decent amount of damage to the point where I was a level ahead. So I'm like level 2, he's level 3. And he had to go into his finisher turn because he was bleeding hand because he didn't hit anything out that could just live into my board. He goes into his finishing turn. He does triple Jake and Finn, but I can't cancel machine it. And I think I end up at like 2-5 maybe. And then I think I just kill him based on what I have on board at that point, which I think is a couple of 3-2 Ninos and like the 2-2s and stuff. So it was just kind of unfortunate on his. But he did end up going into top 8. He took 3rd overall, I believe, which is super cool to see. He was a really cool player. Really nice guy. I was really happy to have that game and, win in this instance, and really happy to see he went far too. So that's really cool. Because we were both really excited for the top 8, Matt. So it's really nice when you meet players that are really chill and they both get to where you want to be. So moving into round 4, we're now 3-0. We're super excited. And we run into another Quince deck, but this time it's basically Itsuki waifu. So I'm like super confused because I'm expecting a whole bunch of 8 standby Quince, and instead I'm playing into like 8 doors and all that other stuff. So this game was similar to the other quintuplets game. My opponent was playing Bracelet, which unfortunately screwed him on his combo turn. He reveals 2 bracelets and like a character, so instead of plussing anything, he just replaced the card he discarded for a random character. This was another one where I just canceled and I killed him while I was level 2. He managed to get one finisher off. I canceled it. He got really pressed really hard into my deck because of how big everything was, and I just had answers. So he did early play a bunch, which gave me a little bit of worry, but 2-2 Nino big. 2-2 Nino big. So unfortunately not much. He was playing some interesting cards that I had never seen in quintuplets just because I haven't really looked at the Itsuki stuff. My wife has that deck, but I haven't really looked into it. So that was a really nice guy, though. It was just unfortunate that he ran into 8 standby, I believe. I think that deck is really good into non-standbys. But not being able to keep board and also just unfortunately whiffing on plussing was just really bad. So moving on to round 5, we are now 4-0. We're kind of super excited. Now I've actually bombed out a couple times. going 4-0 at tournaments where you just kind of drop things. So I'm like, I have to be kind of reserved. So we go into round 5, and we run into Danmachi, and I'm just like, all right, we know from the million games I've had that Danmachi's like a fairly good, like, he'll kill me on offense, I'll kill him on offense, bada bing, bada boom. This game was the weirdest quintuplets game I think I've ever played. I did not put a 2-2 on the board this whole game. Not at 1, not at 2, not at 3. His game was also super weird. Just sort of some of the decisions he had to make on like torching and all that stuff. So I hit him, I think, to 3-4, and like I just needed soul triggers on those last few attacks, and I could potentially have won the game. I didn't get there. I was, I think, 3-1, refreshing into 3-2, which with Hestia, just know you're probably going to die. And he comes back and swung and killed me. This was the player who went undefeated in Swiss. So between him and the Adventure Time player, which I come to find out in round 7, they were the top table. My breakers ended up being really good because of, even though I lost this round, my breakers ended up being really good. But, you know, weird games and Weiss happen. And for some reason, they tend to happen against Danmachi. I've learned for some reason. But whatever, I'm 4-1 at this point, and we go into round 6, where I end up playing into another Danmachi player. I'm like, all right, you know, whatever. Hopefully that my deck does what it needs to do. He does his stuff, I do my stuff, standard game. I hit him to 3-4. I'm like 3-0, I think. And I need to deal 3 damage. My deck, I know, has 1, maybe 2 soul triggers. I can't remember one of my where one of my cards are. But I'm like, all right, there's 2 soul triggers, one of them being a standby in this like 6-card deck. I need to deal 3 damage. I've got a direct for 2, a direct for 3, and a front for 2 is my current board. So I play the Nino that allows you to shuffle stuff back. I shuffle back 2 soul triggers, and I give the soul so I can direct for 3, front for 2. Direct for 3 cancels on 1. Direct for 3 cancels on 1. I didn't trigger any of the soul triggers, so now I've got 3 or 4 soul triggers in like 6 cards. Pretty good odds. I swing for 2. He takes the 2. And then I just die. What are you going to do? I mean, that you did everything you could to try to get your outs, and he just swings back, kills me. Triple Hestia. Yeah, so now I'm X2. I'm looking at the tables because we ended up going into a 7th round. If we hadn't done the 7th round, I end up in 9th or 10th place. But because we go into the 2nd round, X2s are going to make it in. Like 3 of them. And as I said earlier, the top table was the guy I beat with Adventure Time and the undefeated that beat me. So my breakers look really good. So we go into the 7th round here. My opponent mulligans SAO cards, and I'm like, oh, I wonder what SAO this is going to be. Because whatever he mulligan was just like standard SAO stuff. And I'm like, I'm not too worried about this matchup. Like, I imagine that I'm fairly good into. I had 0 like test reps into this. First like turn, still just standard SAO stuff. Then I swing into him, and he hits a 1-0 Asuna, which I couldn't find the photo of. I was going to put it on here, but I couldn't find it. That has +1 soul if you have the Asuna Riki in memory. And I'm like, oh, that's a weird card. I've never seen that. Now, going into my swings, I end up between cancels, climaxes in my hand, and triggers out 5 or 6. And I see the Soul Rush card, and I go, oh, this is not good. If this is like a Soul Rush deck to counteract standby decks, that's a problem. So he hits me, I think, on the subsequent turn. Like, he goes to 1-0. He plays these Asunas with extra soul. And he hits me, I think, to like 1-5 or 1-6. And I'm like, I need to kind of stop clocking. But luckily, the climaxes in my hand are 2-2 climaxes, which is good. So I come back and I hit him, I think, to 1-5. He clocks to 1-6, and he plays out this 2-3 from his hand, which I'd never seen this thing before. So I pick it up, I look at it, and I go, so how did this come into play? And he's, I paid 3 stock. And I'm like, right. But how did this come into play? And he's getting, like, kind of mad at me, and I'm like, no, this is level 2, you're level 1. And he's like, oh, shoot, sorry. So he picks it back up. Now I know this thing exists. And I'm like, oh, that thing has 3 soul. That's not good. So at that point, I'm like, I need to turbo through this deck, which there's certain quintuplets cards that I put into the deck to turbo through if I need to, in like the Rushia matchup specifically. I'm like, I need to turbo through this deck, and I need to get myself into a good deck state, or that 3 soul is going to start, between that and the extra soul, I'm going to start getting punched in the head really hard. Luckily, I think I get 1 or 2 cancels on that turn where he's 1-5. I go to like 2-2 or something. I start turboing my deck between the Ichika and the Itsuki Azusa. Go into new deck. I hit him, I think, to like 2-3 or 2-4. Now, he's stood by out one of these 2-3s at this point, and he's only got that one. He doesn't hard play the other one that's in his hand. So that's good. And I'm like looking at this card, and I'm like, this card, when it gets reversed, you have to clock yourself and it rests itself. And I'm like, all right, there's an interaction we're going to have to do here. So he swings in with this on me for 4 because he triggers, and I cancel on 4. Then I take like a 1 or 2 damage or something off the next 2 attacks. So I'm like 2-4 at this point, and I'm just like, we're gonna do something crazy. I hand encore my 2-2 that he kills with the 2-3. I then play a Riki out, and I Riki myself, and I search out the Itsuki clock kick back row. I play that. I give my 2-2 the clock kick and 500. I then go ahead and reverse this with my 2-2. Because now I'm hopefully out of his counter range. I'm pretty sure he's got splittable counter in his hand, but I don't know if he was gonna have like a 2500. But I was like, 12-5, swing into this, so I reverse him. I then clock punch him, and then because of his auto effect of having to clock himself, he has to clock himself. So he clocks himself. At this point, he's also has a last shot Shinon on the board. Because of standby. And I'm like, I need to hit him to something 3, hope I don't die, and then I have to kill him on a crackback, or that last shot's just going to be the death of me. So I do that thing with the Itsuki, which was a really cool interaction. We had to call the judge just to confirm, because my opponent was like, is that how that works? And I was like, yeah, that's how that works, sorry. I hit him, I think, to 3-2. And we go into his turn. He double last shots, I believe, with some other attacker. The first last shot, he hits me with the combo, and I eat that 4. So now I'm 3-2, and I'm just like, oh. this isn't good. This isn't good at all. Uh, I cancel the attack. Next last shot, I cancel the 4. I cancel the attack, and then I take like 2, and I go to like 3-4, and I'm just like, I need to kill him. He has to die now. So, I managed to, I think, actually do a finishing combo this game. I think this is the only game all day, potentially, where I used the Nino top end. I may have used it in 1 or 2 other games, but I think this is the only game where I Nino top ended it. So I do that. I kill him. We then move into cut. And because of my breakers, I end up being the highest ranked 3-2 in 5th place. And then I forgot that things were circle seated. And I find out that I'm playing Connor, who's on Kanata Marine. Now, Kanata Marine is a deck that I was worried about going into this tournament. This is a deck that can just kill you because of the top end and can just do bad things to you at level 2. So we go into the game and climaxes are just flying out of my deck. I'm triggering with no targets, first attack, second attack, and I'm just like, oh, okay, it's going to be one of these games. I've got like 2 in my hand. And I'm just like, all right, well, we just need to try to mitigate. Now, there are certain cards that I've played in my deck that are there for scenarios. The Itsuki Azusa is there for the Rushia, so I can just spin my deck with costlessness. And I'm playing the anti-change counter for this matchup. So, I eat a little bit at the early game. I managed to get my deck into a, can't even say good deck state, but like okay deck state. I think I end up refreshing 6 into my first refresh at like 1-5 or 1-6, I believe. Unfortunately, at this point, the painkillers had worn off, so I was in a little bit of pain. So I don't have like perfect recollection or like super good recollection. I just remember sort of the key aspects of what happened in the game. So I established board into his at level 2. I hit him, I think, to 2-4, 2-5 for his Kanata combo. He double Kanatas, heals down to like 2-3, and he fronts into my 2-2 with the Kanata. I anti-change counter, and it completely took Connor by surprise. Like, thankfully, I had it in my opening hand that I was able to, pull off the surprise factor. Come to find out, none of the other Quince players Connor had played was playing anti-change counter. So I'm in my head like, oh, maybe I can actually turn the game around with this anti-change. So it gives me a fog in the other lane. I actually sack off my 2-2 to the sack counter effect and hand encore it. So that way it's not in battle anymore, and then I don't have to hand encore it anyway. So I do that, and I'm like, maybe here's the chance for me to turn it around. So I paid out one of my climaxes in my stock. I knew that there was one still way up top, and I think I only take 2 damage that turn, so I'm at 2-4. Unfortunately, I have to clock to 2-5, and he's got an open lane, a Kanata, and something else, and I'm like, okay, I think the way I have to play this is swing and see kind of where things stick, and then if I don't need to push him to 3, kind of play it that way. So I think I swing, and he eats the first one to go to like 2-6, and I'm like, well, Marines are gonna end up coming down, so I just have to deal damage here. because Marine won't heal. So if he's gonna triple me, he won't get a heal, and we'll just see what we can do and just hope we swing back. So I hit him, I think, to 3-2. He triple Marines me. Now I had an Azusa on the board that I could have milled 4 cards. I had 16 cards in my deck, and I think I have 3 climaxes in there. So 3 in 16, triple Marine. I'm still very likely to die from 2-5, but if I can just eat the 2s and cancel the swings, maybe I'll be okay. I've got a card in the center lane, and I've got directs on the side. So potentially this could be fine with 3 and 16. And so he does his thing. He gets his combo because obviously it's Marines, how it works. He directs into me, triggers a Stock Soul, and I just eat the 6. And I'm like, okay. So I eat the 2 first, sorry. So I eat the 2 from the Marine, go to 3-0, then I just eat the 6. And I go, I guess I'm just dead. Like, just 100% dead. Doesn't matter at this point. Flip my, so like, you know, he does the next one, I eat the 2, I just die. I flip my deck over. There's only 2 in there. I had apparently flung another standby in there at some point that I just completely forgot about. Again, it's probably just the life circumstances, other things going on in my head. But my other 2 climaxes were the last 2 cards in my deck. So even if I had milled the 4 on the Azusa, it wouldn't have mattered because I still have, 10 damage sitting there. And all he needed was 9, and I just die. So, I mean, in that sort of like look at the circumstances, it didn't matter, but at the same time, I wish I had been able to play a little bit better at top 8, but even making it 2 top 8 with an injury and all that other shenanigans is at least pretty cool. So, unfortunately, this video went longer than I was expecting to just because of some of the stories, but hopefully you all did enjoy some of the matchups. Let me know in the comments below if you all are going to travel to any of these tournaments. Let me know what you think about some of the things. Did the plays I made seem kind of crazy? Was anything off kilter on my gameplay? And if you want any of these deck techs, definitely leave comments. These are fairly standard deck list. Bang Dream, you can find Jason Malyuk's, I think, topping list from Trios. That's basically the one I copied for Bang Dream. And if you want the Quince one with some of the little tech options, you can always just leave a comment and we can look at doing a video like that. But other than that, thank you all for watching if you stuck around this long, and we'll see you all in the next video.